In the first tutorial on the four lower centers, we presented the microcosmos as having four brains, or centers, that controlled all of its ordinary functions. In this tutorial, we will go deeper into each center and examine its parts based on the level of attention with which they work. As a visual aid, we will use the common deck of cards and assign one of the four suits to each of the four lower centers. Within each suit, the jacks, queens, and kings will designate each part of that center. We will see how, to function properly, the parts of a center must collaborate. And we will end by setting an aim to observe in ourselves the different parts of our four lower centers.
One has to look quietly at all one's qualities and capacities and see what really one has at one's disposal. It is not a question of condemning some and praising others, but of looking at them as the tools which one's innermost self has available.
In the first tutorial on the four lower centers, we presented the microcosmos as having four brains that control all of its ordinary functions. Knowledge of these four centers serves as a map that guides our voyage of self-observation through our inner world. To deepen our ability to observe ourselves, to acquire more definite self-knowledge, this tutorial will add a further distinction within the four lower centers. For this distinction, we will assign to each of the four lower centers one of the four suits of the common deck of cards. Clubs will designate the instinctive center, spades the moving center, hearts the emotional center, and diamonds the intellectual center. In turn, we will divide each of these three centers into three parts that correspond to the definition of the centers themselves. A mechanical part, corresponding to the body, an emotional part, corresponding to the heart, and an intellectual part, corresponding to the mind. The mechanical parts include the moving and instinctive principles together and will be designated by the jacks. The emotional parts will be designated by the queens, and the intellectual parts by the kings. The resulting map of the four lower centers displays them side by side. The vertical division of clubs, spades, hearts, and diamonds designates the instinctive, moving, emotional, and intellectual centers respectively, while the horizontal division of jacks, queens, and kings designates their mechanical, emotional, and intellectual parts.
If we take centers from the point of view of attention, we shall know at once in which part of the centers we are. Without attention, or with attention wandering, we are in the mechanical part. With the attention attracted by the subject of observation or reflection and kept there, we are in the emotional part. With the attention controlled and held on the subject by will, we are in the intellectual part.
Let us now examine the parts of centers based on the quality of attention that accompanies their functioning. The mechanical part of the intellectual center functions without attention, meaning it works automatically. This part is responsible for registering and storing impressions. It can automatically retrieve these memories by association. In proper order, these associations are then offered to other parts, such as the intellectual part of the intellectual center. The emotional part of the intellectual center functions with attracted attention. Its attention is drawn by the desire to know, the pleasure of making intellectual connections, the satisfaction of knowing, or the dissatisfaction of not knowing, and so forth. The intellectual part of the intellectual center works with attention held on the subject by will and effort. It is responsible for comparing ideas, analyzing their validity and relation to each other, and base on such analysis for formulating conclusions. This part of the intellectual center is instrumental in research, construction, invention, and discovery. For a center to function properly, its parts must collaborate. Taking an example from the intellectual center, the emotional part of the intellectual center, or Queen of Diamonds, experiences the desire to solve a problem. For this end, the mechanical part, or Jack of Diamonds, retrieves information associated to this problem and places it at the disposal of the intellectual part of the intellectual center, or King of Diamonds, that compares, analyzes, and reaches a conclusion. The mechanical part of the emotional center generates automatic emotions. Hi, how are you? Sorry, see you later, and so forth. These automatic emotions smooth casual interaction and comprise a large part of social intercourse. The emotional part of the emotional center perceives and feels others. It works with attracted attention and quickly ascertains the emotional atmosphere of a room it has entered, or a particular sentiment from our neighbor's tone of voice. The intellectual part of the emotional center functions with controlled attention. It can entertain opposite points of view without judgment or accusation. It can see truth and error on both sides of an argument and can formulate a response that comes closer to compassion. The mechanical part of the instinctive center controls bodily functions that are automatic and do not require attention, such as respiration, blood circulation, digestion, and so forth. It generates automatic signals that help maintain the equilibrium of the physical body, such as hunger, signaling us to eat, itches, signaling us to change our posture, a sudden dizziness, signaling us to step out for fresh air, and so forth. The emotional part of the instinctive center is responsible for sensual attractions and repulsions. Cravings for or aversions to particular foods, scents, weather, fabrics of clothes, and so forth. This is the seat of culinary enjoyment, although culinary refinement will also require the attention of the intellectual part. The intellectual part of the instinctive center is responsible for the preservation of the organism, but unlike the mechanical part, that will only raise alarms when action is required, the intellectual part is more permanently alert. It will monitor my environment and calculate for potential threats or benefits. It will deliberately engage in situations or associate with people that might promote its aims of self-preservation, and it will deliberately avoid or disassociate with people that might hinder it. The intellectual part of the instinctive center is also responsible for the continuation of our biological lineage and takes concern for the health and preservation of our relatives and descendants. The mechanical part of the moving center controls our automatic movements such as texting, talking, sitting down, standing up, and so forth. It is also responsible for imitation and the capacity to blend seamlessly among other moving centers, as we do when walking in a crowded street or driving in a busy road. The emotional part of the moving center is connected with the pleasure of movement, love of the physical aspect of sport and dance, joy of driving, cycling, horseback riding, and so forth. This part is also attracted to virtual movement and will enjoy playing simple computer games. The intellectual part of the moving center functions with controlled attention. It can plan abstractly, as in scheduling a set of tasks that must be achieved in sequence and within a definite time frame. It can also visualize, as an engineer or architect must envision small parts connecting into a greater whole.
The same method shows how to make the intellectual parts of centers work by observing attention and trying to control it. we compel ourselves to work in the intellectual parts of centers.
The division of centers into jacks, queens, and kings is especially helpful for self-observation because part of one center will predictably stimulate the same part in another. Mechanical parts stimulate each other, emotional parts stimulate each other, and intellectual parts stimulate each other. My jack of spades bumps into someone as I haphazardly step on the bus. My jack of hearts blurts out, "Sorry." My queen of clubs is repelled by the odor of a passerby. My queen of hearts judges them. My king of diamonds undertakes a research task. My king of spades drafts a plan of action. Which brings us to this week's exercise. To observe parts of centers. Am I in mechanical parts, routinely passing from motion to motion, thought to thought, inattentively? Or am I in emotional parts, some sudden occurrence having drawn my attention to it? Or am I in intellectual parts, engaged in a task that requires my directed attention and concentration? These varying levels of functioning bear a direct influence on our state of consciousness, which is why, to be, we must become intimately familiar with our 4 lower centers.